The writer Anais Nin once said that we don't see things how they are. We see things how we are. What she meant is that different people in different parts of the world look at the same thing but see something different depending on their culture. And this is because we all look at reality through our own special cultural glasses that distort the perception of things. What is normal? What is normal for me is not necessarily normal for you or for you if we come from different cultures. And if I move into a new country where the culture is very different from mine, if I don't know what is considered normal there, then we'll have a cultural clash. Even the expression of emotions is determined by culture. Normally, if I smile, it's because I'm having a positive feelings. But for example, in East Asia, it can happen very often that people actually smile to hide negative feelings. What I want to say is that culture matters, and it matters more than we think. In our global village, different cultural values interact on a daily basis, and this can easily lead to misunderstanding, or even worse, to tension and confrontation, unless we are able to take off our cultural glasses and try to see reality the way other people from other cultures do. It's not easy, but we can do it. And the first thing to do is to start a process of cultural self-awareness, which means that before trying to understand other cultures, we need to identify our own cultural values and cultural biases and understand how they subconsciously affect the way we think and behave. And once we have understood that our way of thinking and behaving is not objective and universal, but it's shaped by very specific cultural values and biases, then we can get out of our own cultural reference zone and try to see things the way other people from different cultures do. In this way, we will be able to communicate more effectively with them by finding the appropriate cultural message. To explain this, I'll tell you a little joke. A cruise ship is sinking, and the lifeboats are not enough for everyone, so priority must be given to women and children. So the captain must prevent the male passengers from crowding ahead and taking the few available seats. The problem is that those passengers are a diverse mix of different nationalities and cultures. So, in order to convince them, he must appeal to each passenger cultural code, because the same message doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for everyone. He needs to find that cultural trigger that will move them to do the right thing. So, at first, he goes to the American man and he says, "Come on, dudes, let the women and children on first, and you will be heroes. Yay!" Then he goes to the Englishman and he says, "A gentleman will let the women and children on first." Then he goes to the Japanese and he says, "Please, let the women and children on first, is what everyone else is doing." And finally, he goes to the Germans and he says, "Let the women and children on first. This is the rule and it's an order from your captain." So, I'm glad you liked it. So, what this fictional captain has shown is actually a strong cultural intelligence. Because by adapting his message to the different cultural codes of his passengers, he was able to accomplish a complex task. And this is actually what people who work and live across different countries and cultures need to do every day in order to communicate more effectively and avoid getting lost in translation. And when I say getting lost in translation, I'm not talking about language. I'm talking about culture. As I have experienced myself many times in China, I might be able to speak English with many Chinese people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we really understand each other. Because the Chinese communication style is made up of many nonverbal cultural codes. For example, at the beginning of my experience in China, when I wasn't culturally intelligent yet, I was making a presentation to a group of potential Chinese investors, and I was super confident and happy because actually those guys were nodding to everything I was saying, so I was sure we would end up doing business together. But actually, I've never heard from those guys again. Why? Because in China, most of the time, when people nod, it only means that they understand what you're saying. Doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with you or that they like what you're saying. So this is the kind of cultural misunderstanding that you can avoid by developing a good level of cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence will become more and more important in the future because our societies will become more multicultural, and we need the right tools to deal with that. Let's take the example of Europe. If no immigration occurs in the next 30 years, Europe's labor force population will decrease to such an extent that the current European economic, financial, and social system will be unsustainable. Some countries will be more affected than others, and among those, there's Germany. According to a recent report, Germany will face a shortage of up to 2.4 million workers by 2020 and up to 10 million workers by 2030. This is why the present inflow of immigrants may actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. But there's much more than that. It's not just that Western societies are becoming more multicultural. The power and the weight of the West in the world is declining, and other clusters of countries with very different cultural values and perspectives are rising, making it therefore essential for us to be able to communicate and work effectively with them. Today, among the top 5 world economies, we have 3 Western countries, the United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom. But in 30 years, the US will be the only Western country in the list. Also, if 15 years ago only 5% of the Fortune Global 500 companies were headquartered in emerging countries, today they are 26%, and by 2025, non-Western companies will represent half of the top global corporations. Also, while Western societies grow older and have less children, most of the future world's population growth will happen in developing countries, which means that we will need more and more people to fill in for our declining workforce, and many of these people will come from very different cultural environments. As you can see here, in 2020, the biggest share of 25 to 34 years old with a tertiary degree will come from non-Western countries, with China and India together accounting for over 40%. Global mobility will become the new normal, and the race and competition for talents will be a global one between global actors. As you can see, the world is changing very fast, and we cannot afford to face this new reality with an old mindset. So now the question is, are we prepared to face this new and complex reality? Some certainly are, like those global corporations that are successful because they are global not in name only, but in fact. A company is not global because it's present in many countries. It is global when it's able to operate optimally in each market by adapting its strategies, products, and messages to the different cultural context. Let's take the example of a global brand that we all know, McDonald's. If I say McDonald's, you think burger, right? Well, think again. I introduced you to a McTaro root pie from China. Then we'll have a McCurry pan from India, a Mek bubur ayam from Malaysia, and finally a Mek kebab from Israel. As you can see, in order to be successful and able to penetrate markets that are very different from the American one, McDonald's had to adapt its products to the local taste. And what goes for taste and food, which by the way is a central component of culture, it also goes for mentality and behavior. Successful global companies have understood this. They have understood that while strategies may be global, markets are local. And this is why today, in a truly global corporation, a central role is played by corporate diplomats, people who have acquired a high level of cultural intelligence that allows them to help their companies adjust their strategies to the different cultural context in which they operate. As the former IBM chairman and CEO Louis Gerstner once said, culture is not part of the game. Culture is the game, and if you're not able to play this game, then we'll face many problems that will affect our chances of success. This has been confirmed, by the way, by a recent survey made by the Economist Intelligence Unit that says mainly 3 things. First, that effective cross-cultural communication and collaboration is becoming critical to the financial success of companies with global aspirations. Second, that misunderstandings rooted in cultural differences are the greatest obstacle to a productive cross-border collaboration. And finally, that while many companies recognize the cost of insufficient cultural intelligence, many still don't do enough to address this challenge. And we can actually see this very well in the way some Chinese companies operate abroad. In 2014, for example, over 150 Chinese outbound M&A deals were conducted, but only 67% of those deals were completed. And among those completed deals, many still faced problems in post-merger integration, often due to cross-cultural issues such as management and leadership style differences. A very good example, and very recent example, is the one involving a Dutch company that last year was acquired by a big Chinese corporation. After only 2 months in the job, the Dutch CEO of the company stepped down because of a major cultural clash. What happened is that the Chinese didn't adapt their models and strategies to the new cultural environment and thought they could manage a company in the Netherlands the same way they do it in China. But if they had done a serious and professional cultural due diligence, they could have actually predicted the clash and tried to prevent it with a proper cross-cultural strategy. If we employ the famous Hofstede model, which is a scientifically based model widely used in cross-cultural management to compare and measure different national cultures, we can see very well that without an adequate process of cultural adaptation, the Chinese and the Dutch were actually meant to clash. As you can see, the Dutch and the Chinese culture differ strongly on 4 cultural dimensions. China is very hierarchical, while the Netherlands is very democratic and egalitarian, which means that they have completely different management and leadership styles. The Dutch are very individualistic, while the Chinese are very collectivistic, which means that for them, the harmony and conformity of the group is more important than the single individual self-expression. Then China is very performance, achievement-oriented, while the Dutch culture is more focused on welfare and cooperation. And finally, unlike the Chinese, the Dutch are very indulgence-oriented, which means that they value leisure time and quality of life over restraint and discipline. So, if being culturally intelligent means being able to change your gear when working across different cultures, this example shows where cultural incompetence can lead to. I'm not saying that working with or across different cultures is easy, because it's not. It actually requires a huge investment in training, in people, in time, but one that will eventually pay off. According to a recent study by McKinsey, culturally diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors by being more creative, more innovative, and more able to accomplish complex tasks, because different cultural perspectives brings more options and more solutions on the table, making therefore the company more flexible to adjust to the fast twists and turns of globalization. But to make cultural diversity work and to be able to navigate the complexity of the global economy, a company needs to develop a global mindset, to know how to properly motivate and reward people from different cultures, to understand cultural patterns on how people accumulate and spend money in different cultural realities, and to understand what brands and products mean and symbolize in different markets. But in order to develop this global mindset, we need to develop cultural intelligence, which eventually means the difference between success and failure. But more in general, if we want our societies to be better prepared to face this new reality, we need more than global companies. We need global citizens. And since we're facing a massive paradigm shift on a global scale, our education systems must adapt accordingly by putting cultural intelligence at the core of their priorities. Teachers should be trained professionally about intercultural issues. University programs should include compulsory semesters abroad and cultural awareness courses. And cultural intelligence should be integrated into the school's curricula at all levels of education. In this way, we will equip the new generations with the right skills to grow and thrive in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. If we give them the right tools to develop a good level of cultural intelligence, then they will be the ones able to build the bridges between the different cultures of our global village and hopefully make it a better place than it is today. But obviously the path towards reaching cultural intelligence is far from being easy. It is actually very difficult and at times painful and frustrating. But there is no shortcut if we want to build a world where cooperation wins over confrontation. And finally, we can actually all try to develop a global mindset and become global citizens, because if countries do have borders, our minds don't. So we can all at least try to become more culturally intelligent as long as we fulfill 3 basic preconditions. Always be curious, eager to learn, and with an open mind. Thank you.